Well, quite a controversy with education here in Ontario. The government wants to make some changes, of course, that is not sitting well with some residents and representatives of the education industry. Joining me right now from the Gravenhurst studio is Colin Matthews with the president of OSSTF, Trillium Lakelands District 15, to talk a little bit more about that and a rally that's coming up. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. I really wanted to talk about this before the rally. There is a rally that's scheduled for tomorrow to, I guess, rally against some of these proposed changes. And before we get into the logistics of tomorrow, talk about what is it that OSSTF has an issue with the government right now and what they're proposing to do.
Yes, thank you. So really the rally tomorrow is timed to coincide with the pre-budget consultation phase that the government's engaged in right now. And that pre-budget phase wraps up at the end of this week. And so really the intent of the rally is to signal to the government and hopefully also to inform and engage the public that cuts to education would have a detrimental effect on the student learning environment. So we know that the government ran on a platform of significant cuts to the provincial budget. They had suggested in the election campaign that they would cut 4% of spending. And so without a lot of detail, either at that time or since, our concern is just the impact that those 4% cuts would have on education. And so as I say, the timing's right now to let them know that cutting in the upcoming budget would be problematic for students and for the education sector.
Well, I know there has been some, not leaks, but there has been some indication as to what they may cut in terms of education. This is stemming from things like special funding for special education for students with special needs, things like that. What are you hearing that the cuts may include that's really inspiring this rally? Obviously, you have some sort of idea of what they could cut in education, right?
Sure. In the last month, there's been a number of announcements made, and they really have run the whole gamut from kindergarten education right up to post-secondary education. And I would suggest that they are all concerning to us and really ought to be to members of the public as well. Some of the recent announcements were significant changes to OSAP and grants that were available to students in post-secondary institutions. CBC announced yesterday or reported yesterday that 43% of this year's university students were eligible for grants that essentially made their tuition free this year. And a recent announcement by the government suggested those grants would be cut going forward and that they would be converted to loans, or on a go forward they would be loans that students would repay. There's been some discussion about class sizes, and that's been quite widely reported. The media commented largely on K-3 primary class sizes. And I know that's of significant concern to our ETFO counterparts and to the designated early childhood educators that work with them. The government consultation paper on class sizes really did discuss all the way from K-12, suggesting that they would consider, or the discussion at least was around changing the average class size in boards. And any changes to that average class size in board would mean cuts to the number of teachers. And when you cut the number of teachers, it has to increase class sizes, which then reduces the amount of time students have to interact with their teachers. And that interaction really is the basis of quality public education. The more time students have with teachers and the more opportunity they have for feedback on the work that they're producing, that's really the basis of education. And so we're concerned that cuts or changes to class sizes, cuts to the number of teachers would have a direct impact on students.
Okay, well, look at as well. I mean, they've also announced, just on the flip side, I mean, this is probably not pertaining to OSSTF, but they did announce, for example, that they are trying to support education by, cutting tuition by 10% for students that are going to post-secondary. What do you say to that? Is that just a cover-up from the cuts that they're going to be doing? They're saying they're putting an effort, the government is saying they're putting an effort towards education. What do you say to that?
Sure. I don't think it's a cover-up. I just think that there's a couple of different things going on here at once. Cutting tuition by 10% on one hand would be a welcome change for many students, but when they turn around and put it back on the institutions then to find that lost revenue, we know that the cuts to the 10% cut to tuition represents a loss of about $440 million to the college and university sector in terms of revenue. And the minister announced the next day that it would be incumbent on the institutions then to find that money to make up for that lost revenue, in fact. So on one hand, yes, students would be paying less up front. On the other hand, universities are going to be forced to reduce services, again, increasing the number of students that an instructor or a professor would be in contact with, diminishing the quality of that experience. And as well, along with that cut to tuition, they announced the complete revamping of the OSAP program and removing a lot of those grants. So OSSTF on a provincial scale does in fact represent lots of support staff in universities all across the province, and we have significant concern about those supports. You had touched earlier on special needs students, and we know that special need continues right up to university as well and college, and mental health supports and counseling supports are critical in order to ensure student success, of course in high school as well in college and university.
Okay, so let's talk about tomorrow then. What's the plan for tomorrow? What are we doing?
So we've got a rally planned in front of Norm Miller's office in Bracebridge to run from about 4:15 till about 4:45. We've got a couple of local speakers engaged to talk about some of the issues affecting local students here in Muskoka. And our intention is that we would hopefully engage the public in the conversation, as well as Mr. Miller in the pre-budget consultation phase, and let the government know that educators are concerned about the direction that they're taking, and as well that the public is concerned. We've seen in the comment sections of many newspaper articles feedback from parents, as well as some call-in shows on the radio, and parents are not excited about having their kids in larger classes either. They know that that diminishes the student experience and that the risk of kids falling through the cracks or not receiving the attention they deserve goes up as the number of kids in a class goes up.
Okay, so I guess, and do you hope that the MPP or Norm Miller does show up tomorrow?
It's my understanding that Mr. Miller is out of town, but what we're hoping is that, as I say, the public can engage with us as well. The rally is not just for educators, it's for anyone interested in supporting the cause. We would encourage people to drop by, engage in conversation with educators. It's our expectation that we're going to have a significant number of high school teachers there, as well as some professional support personnel from OSSTF, but that we're also going to have elementary teachers from ETFO, as well as educational support workers from CUPE locally as well out at the rally, and a number of concerned community members also.
Okay, before we wrap up here, we just have about a minute left or so. I wanted to ask you, I mean, cuts to education, I guess it's more of a generic opinion question for you. Is that a detriment in your opinion to society? I mean, these are kids, these are future leaders. What do you say to cuts to education and the domino effect it could have as they get older and be contributing members of society?
Yeah, thank you. That's an incredibly important question. Absolutely, it's got a detrimental effect on the future of Ontario society. The Ford government has talked about Ontario being open for business, and it's impossible for Ontario to be open for future business if we allow the quality of education our kids are receiving to slip, which is inevitably what would occur. We know, and we hear all kinds of talk about the level of technology and the level of education required for future employment. We talk about preparing kids to do jobs that don't even exist yet. That kind of technology, that kind of preparation for students, beginning in kindergarten but right through to post-secondary, is something that's not cheap. We understand that. It requires expert instruction and expert supports for students to be successful in future employment.